Good evening. Welcome back. Spiritual warriors. Striving to master what? The weapons of love, humility, compassion, faith, and self-knowledge. We're working this week from Spiritual Warrior 4 by His Holiness Bhakti Tirtha Swami, subtitled Conquering the Enemies of the Mind. I hope those of you who were with us last week have been paying some attention to your worrying and your anxiety for the week. We went through quite a bit I've had to do some looking over myself. So I'm going to do a brief run-through, review, so we can get on with the techniques and technologies that Bhakti Tirtha Swami offers us, because as we've noticed, his stress is on knowing who we are as spiritual beings and who God is as our supporter and the control and the arranger in our life. So I'm going to just read something from his preface for this book, and then we'll go on. And he tells us, because the title is Conquering the Enemies of the Mind, and he tells us that in Sanskrit we call the main enemies of the mind fear, lust, anger, greed, envy, madness, and illusion. And I'm really hoping that some of you may be taking notes and writing down as you get a sense of how this can help you improve your spiritual life, because that's why we're here, this material world, to develop and renew, revive our spiritual life. So Bhakti Tirtha Swami says some of those enemies of the mind, some of their affiliates are grief, depression, chronic anxiety, panic attacks, obsessive compulsive behavior, post-traumatic stress, and phobias. Sound familiar? Sure. In Spiritual Warrior 4, which we're reading, and 5, he says he addresses and exposes these enemies, and he shows ways to overcome their influence. Their existence is engendered by the false ego, which means that transforming the false ego into pure ego is the ultimate solution. Spiritual Warrior 4 and 5 will offer the reader different spiritual technologies for accomplishing this. Once again, spiritual warriors, here is more spiritual ammunition for you in the war of waging peace and love. So we're still in chapter 1, avoiding excessive anxiety. And I'm just the first section is entitled Do Not Fear. And I'm just going to take excerpts from each little section. He states here, accepting the Lord to be our real well-wisher, our great friend, and our ultimate protector is very profound and is the essence of spiritual life. Are you into your spiritual life? Are you interested in your spiritual life? Is spiritual life an important factor of your daily functioning and endeavors? If so, it means that you are, as he says, accepting the Lord to be our real well-wisher, our great friend and our ultimate protector. And it is the essence of spiritual life. But we have to go through challenges and tests. You remember the whole section we did in Spiritual Warrior 2 about challenges and tests to see, are you really serious? He goes on. Fear and love go ill together. All activities can fit into one of two categories: lust and love. Therefore, a devoted spiritualist needs to become doubtless and fearless. And again, as I remember how this is all following, and if you've been with me, I get a little excited because I know we've touched on these ones, especially when we started with the 12 qualities of a spiritual warrior. So he says, how does a devotee on the spiritual journey acquire these qualities, and what interferes with their development? And he's going to answer these questions by examining anxiety from a psychological, social, and also spiritual perspective. The true spiritual warrior can never be captured by excessive anxiety because of his or her constant absorption in giving and receiving love. Remember, we went through that in Spiritual Warrior 2? Yes. School of Love. With spiritual beings, the soul is made for love. And that's our purpose. So, anxiety, he states, minimizes the Lord's supremacy. Excessive worrying indicates that we have lost control of our minds. It means that we have not fully accepted God's love and omniscience in his ultimate position as the supreme personality of Godhead, who is in control. He says, anxiety, remember these words if you were here last week. This is just to refresh your mind. Anxiety minimizes our access to the Lord's constant help and guidance from generation to generation and age to age. Worrying literally minimizes our access to the potency of God in his different incarnations, who come to annihilate the miscreants and establish pure devotional service and protect his devotees. So what does he offer as the first thing? He says, introspection. We should use this opportunity to look at our mind in order to harness it and place it more in the service of the Lord. Introspection. Take time. Go inside. Look at your mind. What is going through your mind? What is it processing? First, we should look at ourselves to determine the extent that excessive worry permeates our lives. And that's a good time and opportunity also. You sit down with that when you get ready for the paper and pencil. And you're seriously going to check out what's going on, what you're worrying about, what am I doing, and write it down. You may not have an answer at the moment, but write it down. And we'll continue, and he gives us technologies to work with. He says that examination will tell us about our level of faith. A sadhu or saintly person is supposed to be faithful with firm determination and very grave and focused. What does this tell us about our own mindset? Throwing out a few questions here based on what we've read before. Then we went through what is anxiety. Do you remember any of them? And I want to put out to the listeners who have been following or hearing this, if you've had any experience in the week, if you have determined in any way to work with these points that we're bringing out and to try and bring balance, because we're all in this day and age, almost everybody talked to has some worry and some anxiety. And that's part of for the material world and energy, which he even breaks that down a little further. But if you've had any experience and you caught yourself or you paid attention and you made note or was trying to change, make some comment if you feel so inclined. What is anxiety? Worry is a choice and is often a way to avoid change. Worry is also a poor substitute for proper loving action. Excessive worry basically deals with a feeling of powerlessness. Worry is a way to rehearse dreadful outcomes. You know that one. Oh, I knew that would happen. How did you know it would happen? Well, I've been thinking about it all the time. It's really been what? There it is. Okay. And he says, abandoning worry does not mean that we stop planning. The next section was called How to Avoid Anxiety. And he asked a question. Think of this. How do we break this pattern of constantly worrying? How can people who have the protection of the greatest shelter still worry so much? Although we can endlessly worry and consider ourselves to be at the mercy of circumstances, we understand the influence of karma, which refers to any material action that brings a reaction, binding us to this material world. We also understand that the higher authorities, the angelic, and also understand higher authorities, the devas, the angelical hosts, and the Supreme Lord. He never lets us forget the Supreme Lord is always there. As we read in one of the books, he doesn't take a vacation. And he says, we also understand higher authorities, the angelic host, and the Supreme Lord have control over all things. And sometimes when things are happening to us, that's very difficult to understand. But again, if you're introspecting, you're checking out your mind, you're looking at what you're worrying about, you'll see why things are happening sometimes. To the extent that we genuinely surrender, Krishna has the duty to protect and fulfill his part. He asks another question. Considering these factors, where does all the worry stem from? Maybe you've been asking yourself this. Does it mean that we think of the Lord as a liar or a cheater who wants to see us in constant fear and to use us in unhealthy ways in his position as an autocrat? Does it mean that we only think of God as the controller who wants to keep us in the material prison? Okay. He says we want to find a way to break the worry habit before they break us. If we do not stop such habits, our fears can easily overwhelm us and even turn into chronic depression, phobias, panic attacks, compulsive behaviors, and even suicide. He says here, we do not want to fall into these destructive patterns. Therefore, we want to offer the following techniques to help rescue our consciousness from such a negative mentality. And remember, as spiritual warriors, the work we're doing, it's in consciousness. So I hope you have paper and pen, maybe make note of these if you're ready to work on that worry and anxiety. Number one, do not fear the future. He says, we should try to avoid any worry that revolves around fears of the future. As we live each day, we should simply do our very best today and let the future take care of itself. Takes a lot of faith. I'm just thinking, easier said than done. But that's why we're studying these books. That's why Bhakti Tirtha Swami took the time to bring this knowledge to us, so we have a technology and a technique to look at and work with to change habits. When we worry too excessively about the future, we often fail to take the necessary actions that will lead to an auspicious future. Yes, some of you may have heard, I think it may have even been a book out there, in the now moment. What's happening in the now moment? And that's really the only moment there is this moment right now. If you think of the past, it's gone already. And the future, we really don't know until we get to it. And when we get to it, if we're dragging a past in our mind, we can make that future. Listen to this sentence he says here. In many ways, the future is an extension of the present, along with influences from the past. Unfortunately, we can turn into our own greatest enemy. I repeat, he says, unfortunately, we can turn into our own greatest enemy. Our own mind can create the exact situation we wish to avoid. And an unhealthy mental culture often blocks the divine power that can work through us. When we worry about the future, we do not offer our best today. Because what you're doing now, today, needs your full attention. And he's saying back here about faith. If you're on the spiritual path, it means you have faith, as he's calling the Supreme Personality of Godhead. He's reminding us about God, who is the controller. And these are the things, sometimes even though we don't understand what's going on, but if we have that in our mind, we can move through and offer our best right now. Number 2, plan for the worst, expect the best. Now, that's interesting. What he says. What do he say? When we encounter a worry, we should ask ourselves, what is the worst that could possibly happen? When we encounter a worry, we should ask ourselves, what is the worst that can possibly happen? People sometimes say, plan for the worst, but expect the best. If we develop this mindset, a setback will not cause such a drastic imbalance because of our backup plan. Therefore, we will have a chance to act positively while recognizing God's position as the ultimate controller. Plan for the worst, but expect the best. By mentally preparing ourselves for the worst, we can calmly improve on a seemingly negative situation, since we have already agreed to mentally accept the circumstance. 3, remember the consequences. As we endeavor to avoid worry, we should remind ourselves of the dangers of excessive anxiety in terms of its effects on the body and mind. Some of these consequences include poor relationships, hypertension, depression, physical sickness, boredom, lack of creativity, and a lack of productive activity. I'm just remembering back, I was about over a year, but I was on the schedule to give the Sunday feast class. And I believe I had picked the verse and was working on, but somewhere this anxiety started coming up. And you have to really watch the mind. My mind was saying, you think you can talk about that? What do you know about that? And then I'd study some more and I thought I had it. And then the mind would say, but what if somebody asked the question about this part? Will you be able to answer it? How do you think you'll look up there? And again, that's that whole thing of worrying about what people will think. I remember I became more anxious each day until I actually got sick. I got a fever. All the symptoms of a cold. And I knew, now this was interesting, I knew like what was happening. And it was like I knew I had to reverse something in my mind. And I guess I was planning for the worst. If somebody would ask me a question I couldn't answer, but expecting the best, that I could say I don't know and ask if somebody else. So I had to work with that. And thankfully, by the Sunday, I was in a better state. But I really made myself sick. And you watch that. Sometimes you worry about what hasn't even occurred yet. That's what he says. Do not fear the future. So here he's saying, you got to remember the consequences of intense, excessive anxiety and worry. The list goes on and on. If we look at the downside and understand the amount of loss that results from anxiety, we may then decide to be gainers instead of losers. This is why I suggest when you're working with this, doing your introspection, looking, if you start worrying, use pen and paper and just write down what you're worried about. Number 4, collect the facts, then act. We should get all the facts. People often try to make decisions before they have a sufficient amount of information about the problem or issue. This lack of knowledge will definitely result in anxiety. We should look at the entire issue, then develop a plan. Which means, you don't react before you take action. You take the time to look at the situation, the entire issue, and then develop a plan. We should not avoid problems. Instead, we must recognize the need to work through them in a way that can help us accelerate in our God consciousness. You see how every one of these technologies is to increase our understanding of who God is in our lives, and that we are eternal beings, His part and parcel. And if we follow these technologies, it will help and bring us closer and closer to them. Instead, we should not avoid problems. Instead, we must recognize the need to work through them in ways that can help us accelerate in our God consciousness. And in reading, remember when we were doing the challenges and tests, some are pretty difficult, but as we work through, we're learning and we're growing, and we're becoming more aware of how God is working in our lives and through us. When we find ourselves absorbed in a worry, we should take the time to reflect on the actual variables involved in the issue, because this might help us develop a clearer insight and find a more positive way to respond to the situation. This again comes back to even the sentence before. If we recognize the need to work through and can help us accelerate in our God consciousness. If we have some sense of working on developing what He's giving us here of God consciousness, that God is the controller, God is the arranger, and we find ourselves in worry about an issue or situation, he says we should take the time to reflect on the actual variables involved in the issue, because that might help us develop clearer insight. Which means, again, as I said, it's not about a quick reaction. Oh, you said that, I'll punch you out. No. You hear it. Rather than worrying, what did he say that for? You look at it. Where did that come from? What is going on? How did that come about? I used to ask the question, what in me brought that about? And that's an interesting way to work with it. And sometimes I would write. If I didn't do anything at that time, I'd go away and I would write, what in me brought that about? What did I say? What was I thinking? And as we just mentioned earlier about being aware and remembering the consequences of what we've said or done. So we should take the time to reflect on the actual variables involved in the issue, because this might help us develop a clearer insight and find a more positive way to respond rather than react. That's my side in there, to the situation. At the very least, we should clearly understand the reasons for our anxiety. We need to know, why are we anxious about this? Sometimes, he says, spiritualists may struggle in their spiritual lives without even understanding the cause of the problem. If you ask them, what is the problem? They may simply respond, I'm not happy. I feel anxious and agitated. Then you might ask, well, what do you want to do? What is the issue? Often they might reply, I don't know. I just know that I do not want this service, and I don't know what I do want. Such a person may not have properly examined their own consciousness to discover the root cause of their dissatisfaction. And usually in that situation, we're busy looking outside. Well, he said, she looked at me funny. He smiled when I did. You know, when you're pointing fingers. But what he's saying to us, we have to introspect, we have to look at ourselves. We must look at our long and short range goals, he says, to gain more clarity in our lives. Such introspection will help us take more responsibility for our own circumstances, and he says here, appreciate God's arrangement and tests in our lives. We went through that test and arrangements and how it's made to help us fix what needs being fixed in our lives this lifetime, so we can reach the ultimate goal, as our scriptures tell us, which is love of God, and as our ancient Vedic scripture, to end the cycle of birth and death and eventually go back home, back to Godhead. And Bhakti Tirtha Swami brings this out more and more. But you have to be able to get the clarity and the knowledge to work with, so you can see what is that ultimate goal and what seems to be stopping you here, but how you can work through it. He says, after carefully weighing all the facts, that means you got to take time, not a reaction. It's taking time to weigh all the facts. we can make more rational decisions. Although we might still make a poor decision in spite of having a plan, the clarity of vision will help us to fix the mistake or improve on the poor decision. However, if a cloud of anxiety covers our vision, we will continuously add to the cloud until it smothers or suffocates us. Once we have made a careful decision, we should act and then beg for mercy and guidance. We have to act without being excessively attached to the outcome. There is always the element of risk in spiritual life. Well, I underline that one. I put a check in a mark. Because you got to remember, there's always the element of risk in spiritual life. But as he's reminded us, though, as we have been reading about accelerating in our God consciousness, knowing who God is, the controller, he just is building up this for us to get that into our mindset of where we get our help. He says that for this reason, Krishna told Arjuna, this is from the Bhagavad Gita, 18th chapter, 63rd verse. Krishna says to Arjuna, "Thus I have explained to you knowledge still more confidential. Deliberate on this fully, then do what you wish to do." After hearing all the necessary instructions, Arjuna then had the duty to act responsibly. This is the nature of free will. However, our actions should not be foolishly based on mere sentiment or unhealthy passion. But we should act according to the Siddhanta, the ultimate goal. We should do the necessary according to the saints, sadhu, saints, Shastra, scriptures, and Guru, the spiritual master. But you have a checkmate. You have a checkmate. After considering the situation according to these authorities, we must make a decision. Sometimes anxiety results from a lack of decisiveness. Should I? What if? Can I? Will I? And back and forth and back and forth. And that get anxious. But he says, after considering the condition according to the authorities, we must make a decision. Through a proper evaluation, we will be able to make decisions, or at least take responsibility for our action. When we feel tempted to worry about a problem, we should first carefully answer the following questions. And again, I feel like saying, I hope you're writing these down, because every day we're into some anxiety or something of worry. But these technologies are to help us break those habits so we can have a more fulfilled life and be a more God-conscious spiritual warrior. We should first carefully answer the following questions. What is the actual problem? It's a good one, right? Sometimes you're going off, you're shaking, and what is it? And somebody say, well, what is the problem? Been so busy worrying about it, you forgot what it was. So you take the time. What is the actual problem? Next question. What is the cause of the problem? Next question. What are the possible solutions? Next question. What is the best solution that we can try to attain? These questions can help us analyze the source of the anxiety that has absorbed our consciousness. You want me to repeat that? Let's repeat that. What is the actual problem? What is the cause of the problem? What are the possible solutions? What is the best solution that we can try to attain? Instead of allowing anxiety to overtake us, we can pinpoint the problem and try to understand the cause. After we have labeled the problem and considered possible solutions, the Lord in the heart often guides us if we accept His guidance. If we willingly put forth the necessary effort, we can also access the proper guidance from the Lord or from others. And this again is His encouraging us, completely putting in front of us to know our connection with the Supreme Lord, that He is in the heart. Now we went over that again in one of what, kind of forgetting, but I don't know if you remember, we were studying in What is Love, I believe, and where the Lord is, and He's in our heart. And if we accept His guidance, and I was telling somebody the other day in raising my children and different things in my life, the Lord does speak to us, but He doesn't yell. He doesn't holler. He doesn't scream and answer. At least my realization is I just slightly get a sense of do this, do that, call it softly. But if we're willing to put forth necessary effort, we can access the proper guidance from the Lord or from others. Or He'll send somebody and you'll just say, hey, they'll call you, hey, how you doing? Guess what? Da-da-da-da-da. And He'll say, oh my gosh, that's just what I was planning to do. So He's always there to help us, whatever the situation. Number 5, we're dealing now with technology to help us break out the habits of what? Excessive anxiety and worry techniques. And this is going to rescue our consciousness from the negative mentality we've been talking about. Number 5, he says, keep the mind busy. Now, busy with what? Keeping the mind busy is a valuable technique. Plenty of action is one of the best therapies or cures for a worrying mind. Many times we get absorbed in our anxieties because we do not have anything productive in which to engage our minds and bodies. All that loose energy needs to go somewhere. Therefore, a simple technique is to look at our use of our time. When we're engaged in a healthy way, we will not be subject to such excessive amounts of anxiety. So you could take a walk, or go bicycle riding, but not just sitting there and letting this thing mull. Number 6, avoid the trifles. I found out something today in the dictionary. Trifles is something of little value, I found in the dictionary. It was 2 meanings. And of little value, substance, or importance. But there's also a trifle that you make, a dish or something. I thought it was a truffle, but anyway, it was under trifles. But right now, we're avoiding trifles, something of little value. He says, we should carefully avoid worrying about the trifle, things of little value, that can ruin our happiness and faith in God, the spiritual master and saint. Sometimes we have to be practical by trying to understand the probability of our worst fears actually happening. What are the chances that I will actually fall down and break my leg? It definitely happens, but what are the chances? Right, I didn't worry about falling, yet I fell. But I'm thankful I didn't break a leg. It definitely happens, but what are the chances? And yet I think of all the times I've walked back and forth in the same place and nothing happened. But you don't worry about it. I found that at one time. I don't know, I think one of my knees was hurting or something, and I realized I was starting to worry about the possibility of that knee getting weak or something, and I'd fall, and I said, oh no, I don't want that. So I put my mind on I'm walking strong and I'm fine and like that, and didn't spend my time. Okay, number 7, help and serve others. He states an even greater way to avoid anxiety involves utilizing that energy to think of ways to help another person. Take your mind off yourself. We can put so much of our energy into finding ways to serve or assist someone else. There will always be another person whose problems far exceeds our own. If we can relinquish some of our selfishness by trying to help another person in distress, we will not waste unnecessary energy in creating the exact problem that we want to avoid. By thinking about another person, we will naturally take our focus away from our own appetite and concerns. And this will actually cause us to become more powerful. How about that? Because sometimes when you're worried and you're anxious about what's going to happen, how it's going to happen, you begin to feel powerless and frustrated. But he's saying, if you're thinking of another person, it takes your focus away from, I don't know what's going to happen, this may happen, that may happen, da da da. Takes your mind off of that. And this will cause you to become more powerful. Because if you're helping another person, they're appreciating you. And they're so thankful. Oh, you took the time. I didn't know what I was going to do about this problem. You just helped me see, da 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 da. And that works for us. So he says, if we think too much about ourselves, we actually become powerless. Because, why? He said, because we block God from coming through. See, he's constantly bringing us back to the source of our power, the source of our no anxiety. As our selfishness increases, we will correspondingly lose our power in spiritual life, because we will check God's real spiritual power from coming through in our lives. We will prevent the miracles that can occur when we remove our mental and physical disturbances and embrace divinity. This is spiritual life. This is spiritual warrior. He keeps reminding us, hearing it and reading it and reinforcing it. It has to happen in your life. And you'll be able to control and move through things that would ordinarily make us over anxious, excessively anxious. The next, number 8, understand the influence of karma. As we try to break this habit, sometimes we must recognize that a problem is beyond our control, and we will have to deal with it as it is. A certain issue in our lives may just be a part of our karma. And we know karma, What goes around comes around, Cause and effect, we know that. Some people do not have the karma to make much money in this lifetime. Oh, that's my problem. It's my karma. Okay. I'll stop worrying about making a lot of money. Other people can make simple investments that will automatically turn into large quantities of money due to their karma. One person can eat a regulated diet and exercise daily, but cannot seem to make any improvement in their health. If it is a part of a person's karma to die at that time, he or she might even slip on a banana peel and die in spite of all the endeavors to obtain good health. Considering a karma factor, we can try to change a situation if possible. Otherwise, we may just have to accept our circumstances and let go of the worry. That's maturing in spiritual life. 9. I like this one. Establish a worry time. Finally, we need to place boundaries to avoid an excessive amount of anxiety. We put boundaries on children, right? Can't do that. Stay here now. Or put boundaries on friends or family. He says, we may want to have a worry hour or time so that the worry, which may be such an integral part of us, can receive attention at a specific time. We can set aside 1 hour to worry about a problem and then move into another space after the allotted time period. Then the problem does not need to occupy our entire day, but can be dealt with at a specific time. Furthermore, we want to constantly learn from the past while looking towards the future. Sometimes a worry deals solely with a problem or unfortunate situation from the past, but we do not want to remain in the past. No. Are there any questions that's going on? Any comments, questions on this?
Comment is that the class is so nice, and that anxiety has always been a thorn in my side. This is Son of My Soul, or Holly, making this comment. Anxiety has always been a thorn in my side. I thank Mother Indrani so much for bringing this message.
Okay, work with it. Work with these techniques and technologies, and it just revive your life. I'm going to go to this chapter. There's 2 more points. He says the next section is the spiritual world is without anxiety. I remember when I heard that many years ago, and it was like, oh, I would like to get to that place. And we worked through that with our meditation, our prayers, our hearing, our chanting, and following the techniques that he's giving us to break habits that are holding us in this material world. I'll just read some of this because I want to get to a question. Okay. I hope I said that you all can get this book at Krishna.com, Spiritual Warrior 4, Conquering the Enemies of the Mind. It's got some wonderful material in it. He says the spiritual world is without anxiety. The purport of Chaitanya Charanamrita states, the spiritual world is called Vaikuntha, which means without anxiety. In the material world, everything is full of anxiety, kuntha. Whereas in the spiritual world, Vaikuntha, everything is free from anxiety. Another book he mentions, The Topmost Yoga System, the title of a book, discusses actual peacefulness. It says, quote, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu says that those who are Krishna conscious, God conscious, because they have no demands, are actually peaceful. Those who are after sense enjoyment, salvation, and yogic mystery perfection are always full of anxiety. As long as one is full of anxiety, one should know that he is still under the grip of material nature. And as soon as one is free from anxiety, one should know that he is liberated. This fearful anxiety exists because we do not know Krishna, the Supreme Lord, and the Supreme Controller. Instead, we have conceptions, and therefore we are always anxious. Okay. Anxiety is a major symptom of the material disease. If we deny God's existence or deny His position as the Supreme Controller, we then push Him out of the way along with His love and empowerment. We will even block the flow of blessings coming from the previous acharyas. Understand that. He again is bringing us back to grasping, if possible, imbibing, if you will, who God is in our life. Anxiety, he says, is a major symptom of the material disease that's just in this material world. And the scriptures tell us this world is not our home. So if you're not home, you're going to have a disease of some kind, huh? But he says, if we deny God's existence or deny His position as a Supreme Controller, we then push Him out of the way along with His love and empowerment. Even if you can't believe what's happening, how is this happening? It's to not deny that God exists. He doesn't take vacation. He's always existing. And it's to hold on to that. And that's as you hold on, you will see something change in your life. So you don't want to block the flow of blessing coming from the previous acharyas. There is one more reading from Bhagavad Gita. The difference between a person in Krishna consciousness and a person in bodily consciousness is that the former is attached to Krishna, whereas the latter is attached to the results of his activities. The person who is attached to Krishna and works for Him only is certainly a liberated person. And he has no anxiety over the results of his work. In the Bhagavatam, the cause of anxiety over the result of an activity is explained as being one's functioning in the conception of duality. That is, without knowledge of the absolute truth. Okay, the last section of this chapter, I think we have time, is called Service to God. He says here, as we read through these many different pastimes, we will see how all these great devotees acted in a way that would best please the Lord. They did not unnecessarily worry, doubt God's presence, or avoid the problem. Rather, a devotee considers how to act in a way that will bring out the best results and satisfy Guru and Krishna. The devotee wants to find the best way to gain freedom from the material energy or kunsa and embrace the atmosphere of Vaikuntha. Excessive worry indicates that we are pushing God out of our lives and participating too much in the duality. Excessive worry indicates that we are pushing God out of our lives and participating too much in the duality. When we absorb ourselves in anxiety, it indicates our lack of faith in God's personal concern and attentiveness to each of us individually. I'll repeat that. When we absorb ourselves in anxiety, it indicates our lack of faith in God's personal concern and attentiveness to each of us individually. We're all his part and parcel. He's in each and everyone's heart. And personally, he protects us and takes care of us. However, he is watching and is fully concerned. Our excessive anxieties also indicate our own cowardice, because we have substituted worry for proper action. He gives a little account on himself. He says, recently, my own body required a surgical operation. In the time leading up to my surgery, I received many letters and phone calls from devotees all over the world, anxious about the outcome. However, what is the anxiety about? The body is a body. What if the worst happens? Plan for that situation. Why are they not preparing themselves more to serve and help spread God consciousness more effectively? Why are they not trying to free themselves of any type of stagnation that connects us with the duality? We want to feel anxious to let God's mercy come into our lives. We should feel anxious to increase our level of service and use everything we have more resourcefully. We should feel anxious to plan instead of feeling lazy, sorrowful, depressed, or victimized. All right. When these negative qualities increase in our lives, it means we are basically telling Krishna, God, you made a mistake. We want to say to God, your arrangements are perfect, and whatever you arrange is due to your mercy. I want to grab the mercy. Can you say that with feeling and conviction and determination? We want to say to God, he says, you say to God, your arrangements are perfect. And whatever you arrange is due to your mercy. I want to grab the mercy. We want to access that sort of greed. Too much anxiety means that we lack a sufficient amount of greed for the higher, since we have involved ourselves excessively in the lower. As we plan our short-term goals and move toward the long-term goals, we can use these techniques and scriptural references to help us avoid the pitfalls of anxiety. as we try to become doubtless, fearless, grave, and faithful, we will experience amazing reciprocation. We do not want to fall into a powerless situation by allowing this negative mind culture to attack and haunt us. It will try to convince us of God's absence in our lives. However, we want to allow the Supreme to work in our lives by developing proper gratitude and reflecting more on other people than ourselves. And I like that, developing proper gratitude, have an attitude of gratitude. And we have come to the end of Chapter 1, Spiritual Warrior 4, Avoiding Excessive Anxiety. It's quite a bit here, but I tried to give it slowly so maybe you could make notes and really begin the introspections, the questions at the answer. And before I close or ask for questions, I will be away for 2 weeks, traveling to a festival in Cleveland, Ohio, to honor His Holiness Bhakti Tirtha Swami. And you talk about not being anxious, not worrying, and knowing that after what this body has been through, I will be able to make this trip and enjoy the festival. I'm definitely increasing my faith. And so I won't be here Thursday the 21st and possibly Thursday the 28th. I want to leave Ohio and try to go back to Gita Nagari and visit with the devotees there I haven't seen. But I can say I feel with what we have read and studied, we've got a lot to work with and keep us busy until I return in June. And please pray for me that I make it back safe and we can continue with Chapter 2, which will be Choosing Love Over Fear. So, any comments, any questions before we part for a while? No? Comments? No? Is Bhuvan Mohan on tonight? Oh, okay, all right. Anybody else we know? No?
Manjesh.
Okay. Is that from Canada? No. Yeah. Oh. Okay, my dears, thank you for listening. I hope you've gotten something that'll encourage you towards your spiritual growth and your spiritual warriorship. So we'll say Hare Krishna. God bless everybody, and we'll see you next time.